So let's jump straight in and talk a bit about the 5 ways to land the job. So a little bit of context, this data that we've collected has come from researching tens of thousands of transactions and interactions between employers and freelancers. So we've been able to collate a great deal of information about who gets the job, why they get the job, and the different techniques that they use to do so. We've also spoken to a number of employers, from creative agencies to individuals, small businesses and corporates, asking them what do they look for in a freelancer. So all this information has been put together and we will be presenting that to you today. The end goal with this webinar, and hopefully what you take out of it, is a bit more of an understanding as to what employers really look for when they're hiring a freelancer, and a few tips that hopefully you can take and use not just on the Freelancer Club, but in your freelance life in general. So as mentioned, I will be showing the slides that are coming up on the deck. So don't feel the glitch. That's to allow you to see what's coming up next, and also to refresh your memory for anything that we've passed. So let's jump straight in. So top of our list when we started to look and research what it is that freelancers wanted was the portfolio, unsurprisingly. For any freelancers who didn't work directly in a portfolio-driven capacity, such as writers or bloggers, brand is the equivalent. And the main points that came back to us about the portfolio and what an employer wants to see with the portfolio are listed here in front of us. So really knowing who you are, this talks a lot about your identity as an artist and as a freelancer. This idea that you will be able to present to somebody a very distinctive brand portfolio that covers all the aspects of you and your services. What employers mentioned was they didn't like to see erratic portfolios. So if they were sent images that didn't relate to the job, that was definitely a no-no. And equally, if they saw portfolios that didn't seem to have a clear identity running through it or a style running through it, that was something that they turned their nose up at. The first image was often brought up, particularly with popular jobs. So at times when an employer has to run through a couple of hundred applications and that first image doesn't grab them, they found that they would move on and check out the next applicant. Something that we talk about quite a bit at the Freelancer Club is trying to get that first image to represent who you are. And this can be the same for the image you use on your homepage, or the portfolio image that opens up your portfolio book. So a good tip here is, if you're not sure what that image is, what image best describes your brand, jump onto Pinterest or go onto Google and try to find an image that isn't yours, that you feel really resonates with who you are. As soon as you've got that, go back to your portfolio and see, do you have the equivalent? That image should really represent everything that you're about. If you're a photographer working in the bridal industry or the wedding industry, and the image that you use isn't related to that, you're immediately going to throw off a lot of work. So again, this ties into the third point, to be true to your brand and retain harmony. And this means your portfolio and your brand should stay in harmony across all platforms. So that's true to your website, any social media presence or accounts that you have, printed books, even business cards. So try to retain that level of continuity across all platforms. And lastly, we've seen a lot of people present their portfolio in all sorts of different ways. We've had people present in plastic bags before, or printed out small A5 images before they present. Ideally, you want to present your portfolio in a very attractive, professional portfolio book. Anything from A4 plus, which is clearly represented, will do just fine. The other thing we found with the portfolio, and something that a lot of employers picked up on when applying to any positions face to face, was the lack of confidence that they found with freelancers when they presented. So instead of putting the portfolio down and making an excuse such as my best work is on its way, or forgive the first few shots, present that portfolio with some real gusto behind it and be proud of what it is you're showing. I've put a couple of examples visually for you to take a look at. This is Charlie Green, a makeup artist who is on our site. She's also a mentor, one of the most influential makeup artists in the industry, and responsible for a number of different shots, which you've noted seen in magazines. And her work and how she likes to present her work is always with something very familiar or something that very much sums her up. Another good example of retaining harmony is Posnan Productions. Again, a photographer, a member of ours on the site. He really has a style that if you saw his work amongst other work, you could pick him out. And he gets booked a lot because people want to buy into that style. If he had a number of different looks and different identities within his portfolio, then I think wedding clients would find it difficult to know what they're going to get. And there is a good argument to say, well, you don't want to be too niche because you're going to rule yourself out of a lot of potential work. There's a counter argument to say that people generally know what they want and they want to find the best at that niche position. So consider what role you have, consider what sector you're in, and make that call whether you want to go niche or you want to go broad. However you do it, make sure that you can back it up with quality and consistency. The second most important aspect was price when we spoke to employers, and something that a lot of people struggle with in terms of how to price yourself and how to set your day rate. So I'm going to run through a couple of bits that we got from the data, and I also want to run through a quick formula that we can use to get our bottom line. So the first point here is to stay competitive. What we're finding is that as competition grows within the sector, more people are reducing their rates. We find that this is not only very difficult for the individual to survive as a business, but it's also devaluing the industry as a whole. So make sure you stay competitive and be true to your service. A tip is to go and have a look at what other people are doing and what they're charging. Personally, I've never liked this approach because I always find that each individual should have their own price. The sweet spot is what you feel you're worth, and what you're worth is what people are willing to pay. And if you can find that point, which can be experimented on using promos or using different ways to present your price list, you'll often be able to hit on that spot. Again, delivering it with confidence was something that we got a lot of feedback on. Particularly in the UK, we found people to be almost apologetic about talking about money. So when you do come to that critical point of telling the client how much you're going to charge, try not to start on the back foot. Saying it with a little bit of confidence will put more faith in the client than it will apologizing for how much you're going to charge. Layering, we also saw as something very beneficial. So if you do offer multiple services, for example, you're a photographer who can also retouch, and perhaps you have some graphic design skills, don't chuck it all into one big bulk price. This will often scare off the employer or the client. Rather, if you break down exactly what it is that you're going to be giving them, you can also break down the price. It acts as a menu system, and it's something that we're all very used to, whether ordering in a restaurant. We know that If we want something, we can see the price for it. If we want something more, we know it's going to be added on. Even visually, it's a lot more digestible for a client to be able to see how much something's going to cost. And lastly, knowing your bottom line. So this is the absolute lowest amount that you're going to accept, either on an hourly rate or a day rate, or it might even just be for a project. And working out what your bottom line is a very important aspect of knowing how to price. So I'm going to show a slide which does have some mathematical tendencies to it, but bear with me. It's relatively simple. So the formula that we want to look at is expenses, which include not only your personal expenses, such as your rent or food, but also your business expenses. Effectively everything you need to survive as a person and to survive as a business. So added on to that, you want to put down things like rent, Wi-Fi bills, banking bills, any equipment that you may have can be put in for the first year, but that will then reduce as you go on. And in the example here, we've concluded that it's £18,000 for all the expenses. This is over the course of a year. Then you divide it by the number of chargeable hours that you're going to work over a year. So the key word here is chargeable. It's not the number of hours you're working. Let's imagine you work 8 hours a day, which equates to 40 hours a week. You probably will only be able to charge for about half of that time. So any time that you're working and getting paid for it, that's a chargeable hour. So a good ballpark figure, and in this particular example, this person has 1,000 chargeable hours, which also makes it really easy for us to figure out. That comes out at £18. Then we add 20% for tax, and we've discovered that this person's chargeable hourly rate is £21.60. And that is the amount that this person has to charge to survive. Now, if you want to get a better figure as to what you should be charging to live the life you want, you then add on what we call luxury expenses. So that might mean a couple of holidays a year. Perhaps you want to buy a new car. You might have other bits and pieces like restaurants or going out that you would deem luxury expenses. And you add those in here into the expense total. So what will happen is your overall expense figure will go up. Your number of hours, your chargeable hours will remain the same. And ultimately your price that you're going to have to charge will increase. And that'll tell you what you need to charge per hour to ensure you can live the life that you want to live. So moving on, the third point that came back to us and from the data was professionalism. And this covers a multitude of sins, but we broke it down so that we can get a better sense of exactly what it was the employer wanted to see. The first one was using email that isn't associated with your website. So I've put down don't use Gmail, but it can relate to anything from Yahoo to Hotmail or anything that isn't directly a part of your website. So for example, if your website is johnsmith.com, your email might be hello@johnsmith.com. The reason why employers didn't like this is because they felt it showed a lack of professionalism from the freelancer. And their main gripe was that when they're in a rush and when they're going through hundreds of applicants, they don't want to get an email from somebody who doesn't come across as serious or professional. The second point is about staying on point. And this refers to the job description. So something we found on the Freelancer Club is people can be sparse at times when they post a job and they put the description of what they're looking for. When this happens, it can be tricky when you send a message to go about yourself and your experience. But when they do put that information in, it's key to address it. So if somebody is looking for a particular person, particular freelancer, make sure that you address each one of their points. Keep it short, keep it sweet. They're not going to have a huge amount of time to read that initial email, and you can always expand on things in the second communication. The spelling is something that is a real bugbear, particularly for jobs that would be based around marketing or blog writing in particular. It's not an essential in the creative field, and I myself are incredibly guilty of misspelling, and I'm sure a lot of other creatives are, but do try to watch when you put in a small message or an email. Communication came in as a really big point that employers wanted to see more of, and that's communication from top to bottom. So as soon as you get the job, and even before that, employers want to know that you're on it and that you're able to chat. And there's a number of ways you can do this. Not everything has to be formally communicated via email. You can get the person's number, you can message them. You can even use WhatsApp, which is becoming more and more popular for employer-client relations. We at the Freelancer Club use something called Slack, which is an app which is the equivalent of WhatsApp for business. Again, this would be a great tool if you had an ongoing relationship with the client. But for one-off jobs, communication, particularly at the beginning of the relationship, is really paramount. And then general professionalism, which we would presume everybody knows, but punctuality and etiquette on set. It's sometimes easy to forget that you're a service provider and that the client is king. So when you get there and when you start to interact with the people who you're working for, it's always important to remember that level of professionalism. Fourth on the list was personality and the idea that people hire people. And when we spoke to a number of freelancers, this was particularly salient. We asked a lot of them, where did you get your first few jobs when you started? And the majority said friends or family. They also talked about how people would hire people based on who they were as much as how talented they were. Now, we've hired thousands of freelancers ourselves for a variety of projects. And firsthand that we have often reused freelancers who we feel will get on the team, contribute on a personal level as much as their skill set. And this point, it's not all business, relates to the idea that there is a social aspect to what we do. As service providers and as freelancers, we are face to face with our clients. And so there's a huge emphasis on who we are and how we interact with them. So make sure when you do get your next job that you're talking to everybody, that you're swapping business cards, that you're developing your network and showing who you are as much as what you can do. Developing a thick skin refers to the number of rejection letters or rejection emails that we as freelancers often have to experience. So unlike a 9-to-5er who might go for 10 interviews a year and land the job for the next 2-3 years, we are constantly interviewing for jobs on a weekly basis. So a no is going to be heard a lot more than a yes, but we do have to keep pushing, making sure that we don't take anything too personally. Have a look at why we got told we didn't get the job, and if you can get feedback, take it with a pinch of salt, or if you think that it's useful, use it to change your tact. The final point that came through for us was all about profile. Now, this is something that isn't spoken about enough in our industry. But profile refers to something totally outside of the remit of your talent and your service. Profile refers to your social influence and your contact list. To give you an example, we recently had an inquiry for models to work on a music video. Before we had a chance to send through a short list of models, the client just said, send us the person who has the most Instagram followers. Your presence and your influence on social and online is now starting to become a real factor when an employer is deciding who they want to choose for the job. That may seem very unfair, and in many ways it is, because it's no longer who's the best person for the job, but it's who's the best person who can promote the job as well. Now, it's not the case for every job, because not every job needs to be published and promoted. But within our industry, when things are so visual, we're often finding that employers are looking to get a 2-for-1 deal. They want a freelancer who can come in and do the job, and equally, they want to find somebody who can promote their product, their image, their service on their network as well. There's a flip side to this too. When people are deciding who to choose, when you get down to the shortlist, they'll often tap into your social media accounts to check you out and see how you respond, how you react. And so long as you're not posting inappropriate images on there, you should be fine. But equally, be aware to separate your business from your personal accounts. There was a case recently that many of you may have seen with Brooklyn Beckham, age 16, shooting the new Burberry campaign. And it was incredibly clever marketing stunt by Burberry, but it wasn't packaged as a marketing stunt. And it got a lot of photographers in particular very angry that somebody so young and so new had landed one of the most prestigious jobs in the industry. The likes of David Bailey spoke highly of Brooklyn Beckham's ability, and it gave him a lot of kudos. The 6.1 million Instagram followers probably didn't hurt either. So it's becoming a real aspect of why employers are taking on freelancers, and something to consider and something to take a look at moving forward. So let's recap it. The 5 P's: portfolio, price, professionalism, personality, and profile. All of the major aspects that employers look for when hiring a freelancer. Before we